Welcome back, and we are at part B now of our elegant evergreen wall hanging. Hopefully by now you have built this design and saved it in the memory of your embroidery. And I hope you will go back and maybe practice doing that. It's a really good exercise to just start with a blank page and go back and try redrawing this whole thing, recreating it, to see if you remembered all the different steps. But right now we are ready to actually start sewing. And to do that, we are going to need to get our biggest hoop, and we're going to layer our entire quilt sandwich all in the hoop. So I have the backing fabric here that is facing out. Then I have my batting, and then I have layered my background top fabric that's the background of my tree. Here. Now I wanted to just point out a couple of things here. I have done this to my hoop, and you could do something similar. I have drawn arrows where the border or the margins of my embroidery are in my hoop, and that can come in really handy. So this hoop only stitches to about 2 inches to the edge there, or about 1.5 inches here and here. And you can see on the left, it stitches about 1 inch over from this side and about 1/2 inch over from this side. It's a little deceptive. Your design actually is not centered visually in this hoop. It's actually a little bit left. So keep that in mind as you're watching the design come out. It may look like it's not centered, but it will be. I want to talk about a couple of things down on the machine. So we're going to turn over to the machine here and just show you a few things to get set up. Your machine came with 2 different bobbin cases. One of them has the purple dot in the middle, and the other one, which I have in the machine right now, is blank. It does not have a purple dot, and instead it has a green screw. This screw is painted green on the one that's in my machine. The one that is painted green is the one that you would use when you are using the included thread that came with your machine, the Finishing Touch bobbin thread. It's got the right tension in it to accommodate this thin thread. So the way I remember it is green means go, goes with the thread that came with your machine. That's my silly way of remembering which one. If you decide to use another type of bobbin thread, let's say you would like to use Aurifil in the top and bottom of your quilting, or you just use regular 50-weight Mettler thread in the top and bottom, that's fine, but you may get better results if you switch to this bobbin case. So that's why those are both there, and you really will have to experiment with your machine. If you don't like the tension on your bobbin, try using the other one of these. I'm not going to take time to put it in right now, but you have to turn your machine off to do it. You let go right here of the throat plate, and it just pulls right out, and this one pulls right in, and there are white arrows here to align together so that you know you've got it in right. It's not hard to do, but right now I've got the green one in there. I am using the Finishing Touch bobbin thread, and I'm also using this very fine Invisifil Wonderfil thread. Now I've got white for my actual stitch out, but it is Invisifil. It's very, very fine, almost invisible. And I like the combination of these two. They balance each other out. Your pattern will be double stitched, so because that's just what background stitches do on the Solaris background fills. So double stitching this ends up being just about the right thickness. You're certainly welcome to use Aurifil in the top and bottom. You can use really any combination, but keep in mind your differing tensions and thicknesses. You may need to do some adjusting with that. And then I am using, you could either use just an 80 sharp, you could use an embroidery needle, a 80 or 90 embroidery needle, or an 80 or 90 sharp. Are we embroidering? Are we quilting? We're kind of doing both. But since it really is an embroidery design, you can use an embroidery needle. You'll have to experiment and see which ones your machine likes the best. In a few minutes, we're going to be using a metallic thread on one of our fills. And for the metallic thread, I like using the metallic needles, a number 90 metallic needle. So this is just a little bit of equipment there, and I'm ready to go ahead, put my hoop on. And bring up the design. I'm in embroidery, and I'm going to the pocket. Now I have a lot of things here going on. Why? Because we remember as we were building this step by step, we were making sure not to lose our design, so we kept adding it to memory. And now I've got a lot of these in the memory. That's why sometimes I'm skeptical about adding all those steps to memory, because you can have so many in here that it looks confusing. The last one will be the one in the top left corner. As it adds to memory, it adds over here. So this is the final one that I have, and that's the only one I need now. And if you would like to clear out your memory, you can hit the icon that has the little pencil down here, select the one that you want to get rid of, and hit delete and OK. But the one I want to choose now is this one, the final one that I did. Actually, I'm going to hit return and get out of that menu. All right, so there's my design, and here it comes up. I'm going to hit set, and there's that wonderful design that looks like a mess because of all that background fill, but it's going to work out just fine. So I like the way this is. I know it's already centered in my hoop, and I'm going to choose embroidery. And the very first thing it's going to do is my basting stitch. So here I go. You won't get a green light until you put your pressed foot down. I'm going to hit start, and it should sew that basting stitch all the way around the outside. The basting stitch is a great idea to use for anything you are doing in the hoop. It will always put a little basting stitch around any design you're doing. And in this case, it's going to serve a double purpose, because that basting stitch is going to become the outer edges of our top, and that's going to be my guide as to where to put my border too. So it serves a double purpose. Here you can see how it's 1 inch on the right and only a ½ an inch on the left. So that's how you know where to put those arrows on your hoop if you'd like to do that. All right, I'm ready for step number 2. There's the picture of it. It's that background fill, and I'm ready to start. Now sometimes it will do some little tiny spaces and then move to another one. This background fill is really feathery. So it did a little feather up in the corner, and then it had to cut the thread and come down to another space. In general, these background fills start at the middle and then start going wider and wider around. So you'll see that it'll start here, go wide, it'll eventually fill up the whole hoop, and then it will go back and maybe do a few little corners, a few little parts of feathers that it wasn't able to get in the continuous line. This, I want to point out a few things. Since I told you that this is a great project for beginners, I want to give you a little bit of beginning tools. You can start and stop anytime in the middle of your embroidery by pushing that button. If you have to step away and you don't want to leave it going, you can always do that. If your thread should happen to break, or you should happen to run out of bobbin thread anytime you're embroidering, you're going to get a message on your screen. And in fact, I just like to do that just so you will see actually what is happening. I'm going to cut the thread right here and let it go, and let's see what happens, just so you'll know what to do if that happens to you in your project. So it recognized, it says check and rethread the upper thread. So that should be pretty easy to do. Now if I have to change bobbin thread, what it will do, it will give me a message on here that my bobbin thread is empty, and I'll have a little icon down here that looks like the embroidery unit. And what I do when I have to change the bobbin thread is I let the machine take a couple of extra, whoops, that's one long. I let the machine take a couple of extra stitches just to stitch in place like that. And then I push that button that looks like the embroidery icon, and it moves the embroidery unit out of the way so you can take this off, the hoop off. You can put new bobbin, a new filled bobbin in. You can put the hoop back on. And then I do what I'm going to do right now, get it rethreaded. And whoops, I forgot to lift up my presser foot there. So it won't lose its place on the embroidery no matter what you have to do, as long as you don't take the fabric out of the hoop, it's going to remember. So I can rethread. Again, I could put new bobbin in, and if I had put a new bobbin in, I'd put my hoop back on, and then the first thing I would do is I will hit some stitches. Now, if you felt like, and here in this case, it actually took 4 or 5 stitches that didn't have thread in it. It took it about 4 stitches to figure out that I didn't have thread. So I have a little empty space here. So it's very easy to go right here to this icon. It's a needle with a minus and plus sign. And I can go back 1 stitch, 10 stitches, 100, or 1,000 stitches. And I'm just going to go back 1 stitch by 1 until I see the needle go right over the previous stitches. And maybe I'll go back 2 or 3 just to make sure it goes over that cut where the thread was cut. And now I'm going to use my reinforcement priority button to just do a few, just to make sure it's knotted and locked in there. And then I can just start, and it picks right back up where it was. It does not knot the thread when you press start, so you have to remember to do some reinforcement stitching before you start up again anytime your stitching is interrupted. But there it just backed up over the previous stitching and it went right on. Okay, now it's almost done, and it's going to go back and find those little spots. Oh, there's some bubbles and feathers here that weren't part of the continuous line, and it's just going to have to fill them in. It's just due to the design, the type of design that I have. And really it's up to you. If those are so inconspicuous on the edge that you don't think they matter, you could just stop right now and move to the next color, but we're going to let it go ahead and stitch itself all the way out. And it did its little happy song, which means it's done with that step. So it looks beautiful. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm sure yours looks just the same. It's really, really pretty on this background fabric. So my screen tells me that I'm ready now to do the placement stitch. And so for this, I'm going to go ahead. You could, if you'd like, do it with the same color thread, but it's awfully hard to see since it is invisible thread. So I'm going to go ahead and change just my top thread to my green color. And the first thing it's going to do now is come over here and start drawing my tree outline. All right, now it is time for my next step. Remember, the pink lines that we drew are the lines for cutting. And so for these lines, I want to, this is actually going to show on top of my different applique fabrics, so I do want to be a little bit more mindful about what color to use on these. So when I get to my star, because my star is going to be this nice light color and I'm not going to have any cover stitch over it, I probably want to just use maybe the clear monofilament on my star. I believe the way I saw this stitch out is it looks like it's doing this section first. It's hard to know how to control that. It has to do with how it registered when we were actually building this design. But I believe that the first thing it's going to do is put a cover over this. And so for that section, I have a green here. And so I want to make sure that my applique fabric covers the whole piece of that tree top. And I'm going to hit OK and cursor foot down. And I can see right here the green dot tells me that that is the first thing it's going to stitch out. Now you can hold this down, you can tape this down with the embroidery tape, the Kimberbell tape or the OESD tape. But if your fabric is pressed nice and crisp, you can also put some starch on this fabric if you want to keep it nice and crisp. But if it's big enough, I think it pretty much lays down okay on the fabric. If you're worried about your shifting a little bit, you can go ahead and put some tape around it. And now at this point, I have to stop my machine. Now, typically, you would not do this. If you purchased an applique design, it would probably have each one of these tack down lines as a different color or a different thread change. And that's to give you time to cut away, you do each piece and cut away your fabric. Because we designed this ourselves, we did the whole tree as one unit. And you can see that if I put my star fabric on top of here, and let it stitch the star, it's going to also stitch down on top of this fabric. So for this exercise, since we built this ourselves, I need to cut just that excess fabric. And I'm going to come back later and do a better job of trimming that. But for right now, I just want to make sure that this fabric is not going to interfere with my star. And I need to cut it away here and make sure that it doesn't interfere with the middle section of my leaves on my tree. So you can see what I've done, just rough cut to get it out of the way of the next pattern. Now I can see that it's going to stitch my star next. The star fabric is the fabric that I recommended you put a interfacing or some kind of woven fabric fusible to the back of it to make it a little stiffer, because this is one that's not going to be covered. Remember, we're going to leave the raw edges on the star. We're only going to triple stitch around it. And this is also one that I really don't want it to be green, because that green is going to show through the pretty gold metallic thread that I'm going to use at the end to cover it. So I'm going to go ahead and go back and just use my Wonderfill for this, since I've got it handy here. Press your foot up whenever you want to thread. Whoops, hit the wrong thing there. Now, just don't sew your fingers, but you can just lightly hold down your fabric. Friction usually just makes it kind of stay there. And you can't see it, but it's double stitching my star. a good habit to cut your thread from here. Whoops, I need to stop that. Cut your thread up here and then pull the thread out from just above the needle or through the needle in this direction. There are some springs in here that the thread goes around, and if you pull backwards on them too much, you get a little too rough on it, over time it can bend or remove those little springs. We all do it every now and again. Sometimes you have to. If the thread's stuck in here, there's no way to do it but pull it back. But just be mindful of those springs and do it very gently if you do have to pull it back the other direction. All right, for my middle section, I've chosen this. Let's see, which one did I choose for my middle? I think I chose the kind of medium for my middle section here. Remember, you have to intervene here or it'll just keep on going. So go ahead and press your start button so that it won't keep sewing the next one. And so here again, I need to just rough cut around there. Now I like to use some curved scissors when I do applique because it allows you to trim your fabric right on the hoop and you don't end up cutting the fabric underneath. Now it looks like I do need to raise this up a little bit. Here's a little corner I have to clear out. So you can see now I've got a clear pathway to my next layer. I got this cool brown fabric that looks like a tree trunk. I can do it in green or brown. It's going to all be covered with brown thread, so I think that the green will be fine for now. If you want to change to brown, you certainly can. But it will be covered with brown cover stitches. And that's the end of that step. So it's time now to come back and really clean cut all the way around my pieces. The only one I'm not going to cut yet is my star. So to do this, it's worth just taking out of the hoop. Now do be careful whenever you're at this process. There's always a tendency to take this is what I want to do. I want to cross my legs and stick this right on top of my lap. And there's my big knee poking right there, and what that's going to do is push up and distort. It may even make this loose in the hoop. So when I've got this out, I am very mindful to have it always flat against something here so that it's resting on its frame. So right here, that's okay. It's better to just put it right on a flat table. I don't have one here to show you. I don't have room for it here, but something nice and flat so that nothing is pushing up on the back of that fabric. And I love to use these little snips, or you can use regular scissors that are curved, and I just kind of grab the fabric here and I call it chewing. I just chew, 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 chew. I don't snip and then go to the next place. I just chew, and you can see how I do it here. And it gets right up next to my stitching line. Now, you may have to turn this several different ways to get it to the right place where you can cut, but I'll try to do it here because I have limited space. You see there I can get very close, and you can get really fast at this if you have some nice sharp scissors. if you do cut a little bit of your stitching, it's not the total end of the world. If you just cut 1 or 2 stitches, they are going to be covered up. So don't panic, but with good scissors, you will end up not cutting a single stitch. So there, I am just about done with this part. So do be sure that you get that star fabric cut out of the way. And we're ready for our next thread change. The next step I have over here is that fill that we put in the leaf kind of green part of the tree. And this is where you might choose to use a metallic thread. So let me just say a few words about metallic thread here. Metallic thread is a little finicky, and there are all kinds of ideas about what to do with it. I think in general the best thing to do is you may have to try some different types of threads on your machine. Actually, the one that I wanted to use, the one that I like is the Mettler, is the one I've had the most success with, and I see that I'm almost out, but I think I have enough to go ahead and do this project. It doesn't require too much. I have found great success with this Mettler metallic thread, but I do recommend a metallic needle, and I'm going to use a metallic 90 needle. And for the thread, I do the very same thing that I do for the other threads. I let it come off of this spool holder and I use this plug. However, you're going to find that that plug does not fit in there, and that is okay. I have really discovered that this works better for me than, say, trying to put on a spool cap like that, because again, that's one more edge that this thread has to travel over, and the more edges it goes over, the more finicky it is and the more likely it is to break. So I've had good success with this setup because all it touches is a little bit of this spool, and it doesn't even touch the little gray plug that I put in it at all. So we will have to keep our fingers crossed a little bit because metallic thread doesn't always behave. It's kind of like a toddler. You never know if it's going to behave the time you're putting it on camera or not. But let's see if this works because I have had good success with this in the past. So I've got my metallic thread, my metallic needle. I'm ready to go on to this step, and when I go, I see that it's going to start filling in this green tree here. Oh, and I forgot to thread the needle. Sharon's reminding me. Thank you so much. All right, and so let's see if it's going to behave for me today. It has to fill in all its little pieces. I really wouldn't use this technique for a big quilt, a real quilt, because it does so many starts and stops like this with these fills that it does leave the little thread cuts on the back. So I really only do this with things that are going to be wall hangings or that type of thing. All right, so I got the sound that it's done with this section, and I'm ready for the next part. And the next part I see here is my star. Well, that's perfect because I want my star to stitch out in the gold, and I've already got the gold on there. So I am ready to go. I'm going to triple stitch my star to finish it off. Oh, the reason I didn't trim it is because this particular design, it's not actually covering the raw edge. I'm going to have the raw edge exposed on the star here, and that's why I put the backing on it so that it would keep it from fraying out on me. All right, and so it looks like I am ready for the next step now, and that is the cover stitches on the tree. So for that, I'm going to go to my green color again. And I'm going to go back to my regular needle. So I still have my metallic needle in there. And I have noticed that, my screwdriver, I have noticed that if I forget to switch back, the metallic needle really does do okay on other threads, but other needles don't do well on metallic threads, if that makes sense. So you do need a metallic needle for metallic thread, but you can get away with, you can use that metallic needle for other things. And we're ready for our satin cover stitches. So it goes around it to do sort of an underlay stitch, and that's why I told you it's okay if you did cut a little stitch as you were trimming. It will get stitched down again. All right, and finally I'll change to my brown. And time to cover up the trunk. And finally, I get that lovely sound that tells me I am done embroidering. I can remove this from the hoop, and this might be a good time to take yourself some really nice scissors, and you can go right along that star there. And you can see I'm cutting about a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch. And it's making a real pretty finish to my star. It is raw edge, but since I ironed on some interfacing to it, it won't ravel and have any little fuzzies on the end of it. You can make yours as close as you want to that pretty gold stitching. And I'll go back and finish that up and polish that up a little bit, but you get the idea. I want you to take a marking pen. You're going to take a ruler and a marking pen, and you're going to mark a 1/4 inch away from that outside basting stitch. So remember I told you that basting stitch had two purposes. It was going to hold our fabric down for us when we embroidered, and it was also going to serve as the border of our top. So it was hard for me to see it under the ruler, so I put a little red mark where my basting stitch was, and then I moved that over 1/4 inch, and I just used a red friction pin. It will not show, so even if you used a pencil on this, it's okay, but I always like to use a friction pin because it will disappear immediately when it gets ironed. So I just drew all around the quilt 1/4 inch outside of the basting stitch. And then I'm going to take some regular sewing shears. You can't use your rotary cutter for this because it's very important that you only lift up the top layer, just that background fabric. You don't want to be cutting your batting or backing. And now you're just going to take your shears and cut along your line you drew. So you're basically just cutting 1/4 of an inch away from that basting stitch. And you'll do that all the way around. Of course, I did a little pre-sewing to make our video go a little quicker today. But you'll do that all the way around. And the next step then is we are going to add our borders. So in your instructions, you were told to cut 2 shorter pieces of border and 2 longer strips of border. So you're going to start with the short pieces, and you're going to lay them now right side down, right sides together. And you have that cut edge that you just trimmed. And that way, when you line your border piece with that cut edge, then when you sew your 1/4 of an inch, you're going to sew all the way down there. You're going to flip that over, and you can see that I've covered up my basting stitch. So I don't have to even go back and take out my basting stitch. So you might want to think about where you set this. I actually set mine just a little to the left of my cut edge because I knew I cut a little fat. And we're going to sew straight down. Now the first thing I want to do is get this arm out of my way, and as you probably know, if I hit sewing on my home page, this arm will move out of the way, and I now have a pretty nice bed for sewing. So even though I'm going to do regular sewing right now, I'm still going to leave my embroidery unit on because I'm going to come back to it in a minute, and I have plenty of room right now. So here's the thing I want you to remember about this foot. It's very kind of back heavy. All the bulk is in the back of it, and so it tends to kind of drag down. So it's going to clamp on just the same way as your other foot came off. Oh, and let me back up. This is a great time to use the feature that locks your machine. It looks like this at the very top. It looks like a needle and a presser foot. This locks the screen while you're doing things underneath here so that you don't accidentally sew through your finger. But now I can just manually lift that lever up because that presser foot lever lifter kind of gets in the way. And so now I have room. I'm just going to start like this, find the screw there, and then just sort of swivel it over so it fits against there. And now the thing I have learned is hold the back end up a little bit. It wants to droop down. Hold the back end up as you turn this screw. That will seat it much, much better. And once you get the screw in there, it will finish seating itself correctly. But if that back end is dragging down, it's hard to feel that you've got it on there correctly. So hold the back end up, thumb tighten, then take your screwdriver and give it about, from about 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock is what I went, just to machine tighten it just a tiny bit. You need it a little tighter than thumb tightened, but you don't want to ever tighten hard on any of these. They don't need that much tightening. All right, that's on there good, and now I have to take care of the little plug-in. I always have to stand up and see it. I can never find where it goes back here, but it's just right back here to the left, and you'll see it very easily. I just can't line it up unless I actually look. You're going to snap that in, and your dual feed's ready to go. So now I can hit that icon again, and everything's back on where I need it. And by the way, this dual feed foot will raise up over here when you want to use it not as a walking foot or not as dual feed. You can just sew regular with it, and then you can lower it here, and that will lower the conveyor belt down onto the fabric and use it as a dual feed foot. You can also go into page settings, or here it is on page 2. There's a dual feed adjustment, and I can adjust how fast or slow it is feeding my fabric. I keep it on default 0-0. I haven't had any trouble with that so far. So I'm going to finish. I'm going to do finish up what I started, which is laying my borders over. and finding, you do have some good red markings here that you can find for your 1/4 inch. I'm on stitch number 3, just a regular centered straight stitch. And if you ever lift this up by hand, you have to lower it by hand, or you'll get a message saying you have to lower your presser foot. And I already had done part of this to speed things up, just to show you. Oh, and I want my presser foot to go up for me. So you're going to sew that both the top and the bottom, and you're going to flip those over and iron them. Once you get the top and bottom done, you are now going to add your long ends, which are the sides, your long pieces. And I almost finished with this one. Let me just finish this one up, and then I'll add my other side. And there again, it reminded me that I need to lower it. Right, and sides together. This time make sure it goes all the way to the top of that previous piece of border that you put on. And I'm ready to go to my ironing board over here. Boy, it's really starting to look like a nice little project here. So it's tempting right now, oh, I want to trim that off and make it all nice like a quilt, but don't trim it yet, because we're going to be using the border function, and all of this extra that we have sticking over is going to really help us do the hooping, so we don't want to trim anything yet. What I do want to do right now is I would like to go and maybe just do a basting stitch to secure the edge of my border there so it doesn't pucker up as I'm working. And for this stitch, I love number 1-08. It's a nice big fat juicy basting stitch, and it moves the needle a little bit to the left. So if I center the edge of my border right in the center of my presser foot, then the left justified needle will be just where I want that basting. It will be inside, about 1/8 of an inch inside, and it's going fast because it makes a really nice big stitch. And again, don't try to take a shortcut and do this with a regular presser foot. You'll be so disappointed. You will completely skew all of your border and it will not be straight. So there's that nice fat basting stitch that it's doing for me. Now, in order to get ready to sew this border function on, to quilt the border and use the border function, I need to think about how this is going to fit in my hoop. So I want to get my hoop out here. I'll just get the front of my hoop, and if you remember at the very beginning, I told you how I marked my hoop. I have marked my hoop to show me where the margins are that do not stitch. And that's going to be really important, because when I go to hoop this, I need to be sure that my border is below that arrow and to the left of that arrow. I'm going to have to hoop this somewhere like that. But how can I hoop this? I don't have enough fabric over there to do that with. So for that, I use a little trick, and I just get a couple of scraps, and I just call them my flanges. These are just scraps of fabric that I had left. I kind of double folded mine to make them a little stronger. And you have two options here. You can either just get straight pins and pin these to the extra batting and backing fabric, Don't cover your border. You can pin them there. Or, hey, I've already got my dual feed. I'm already set up with this basting stitch. I'm just going to baste these on here because I've already got it all set up for that, and it's so easy to do. So there's my big mess I've made with all these things hanging off, and now I've got a lot of room to work in my hoop.